Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our second in series of Agribusiness Talks. Today we'll be talking about consumer trends. My name is Jelena Erker, and I'm a banker in Agribusiness team. With my colleague Tamara Tosic, I will be your host for today. Before diving into the topic, let me give you a brief overview of what EBRD Agribusiness team does. We are one of the largest investors across the entire food value chain, starting from farming to food delivery. Most of our clients are well-established corporates. However, as the industry is getting increasingly disrupted, be it by technology, larger awareness of sustainability issues, as well as pandemic from last year onwards, we are increasingly looking into new topics and new corporates that are directly addressing those challenges. Also, as investors, we have spent more than a decade analyzing behavior of millennials. We were all looking into what millennials will do next. However, new Generation Z, is becoming dominant with more than 2.5 billion in population and expected 30% of global income by 2030. They seem to be a cohort that will be dominating consumer trends. Today's discussion will try to answer three questions. First of all, what those generations are, what drives their behavior and their general consumer patterns, how do they influence consumer industries, and finally, how do our clients respond to those changes? We have few amazing speakers. We will hear from Dr. Eliza Filby, who is a speaker, writer, and a researcher concentrating on generational intelligence. She will set the scene for us. Then we will hear from Christina Rogers, who is a global industry consumer leader in Ernst & Young. She will give us an overview of consumer trends based on E&Y Future Consumer Index. Before handing over to our speakers, a few housekeeping points. First of all, this webinar will be recorded and available for you to view later on. Secondly, we would like to hear from you. On your right-hand side, there is a chat option where you can post your questions during the webinar. We'll have a dedicated 30 minutes Q&A session at the end of the webinar. And with that, Christina, over to you.
Hi there. Thank you very much for having me today. I'm Christina Rogers, Global Consumer Industry Leader at EY. And I was listening to Eliza's discussion and presentation with great interest. Given I am a Gen X living with two Gens in the house. So it's a very interesting dynamic. And I will be happy to learn more, Eliza, about how to manage that, that's for sure. In any case, I'm really looking forward to spending the next few minutes sharing some thoughts and just some data and ideas that we have been thinking about through the pandemic. If we can go to the next slide. Last year, as we went into lockdowns around the world in sort of February, March, and April, we at EY decided it was, obviously going to be a time when consumer behavior was going to change significantly. We were locked in our homes, things were closed, everything we knew about the way we went about our daily lives was very different. And the question we had at that time was, which of these behaviors are going to be cemented as new when we come out the other side, and which things are more temporary? And so we're sort of in the space now where we are looking at some of the research and data we've collected over that time to start understanding what is being, I guess, put back to normal in different parts of the world, and what sort of behaviors and perceptions and ideas are being cemented given how long we've been living the way we've been living in different parts of the world. So if we can just go to the next slide, I'll share with you just some of the core of the research we're doing. We're now, we started off in Western Europe, US and Canada, just quickly got the research out into the field, and then over time have added in countries, some of which are relevant to the audience here. And most recently in our last 2 rounds of data, we've been in 20 markets around the world, and we're now interviewing and researching over 14,000 people. And the point, as I said, is really to get a view of, in these places over time, you know, with the sorts of questions we're asking and the data we're collecting, what can we see as being cemented as new behaviors, and then what do companies and business people need to be paying attention to, and what is gone back to normal. And so if we just dive into some of this research, I'm not going to drain every slide in terms of the data that's on it. We've just pulled a few basic data points to share some ideas with you here today. If we move to the next slide, you can see over time, this is some of the data that we have. And you can see back last year in May 2020, and we have a recent set of data from this past January. And I think the bottom line here is that clearly much of the way we go about our daily lives and what we are doing in terms of shopping and buying is changing, and that change is here to stay. So while over the past year there have been fluctuations in what we've seen in terms of the data we've been collecting, for the most part there are a number of trends, and we can double click into all of these trends if we had time, but for the most part much of what we've been experiencing is here to stay. And so if we think about sustainability, Eliza mentioned that was important and has only become more important for many consumers over the past year. If we think about what people are buying in terms of what they bring into their household, that changed significantly as we first went into lockdowns last year, and that is still different. People have settled into new routines about what they bring into their home. And certainly, and I think we'll get into this with some of our panelists around the world, you know, many of us across generations have changed the way we shop. And certainly a vast amount of certainly grocery shopping, where it wasn't present before, has moved online. And we'll talk a bit about that. But primarily, the bottom line is new habits are here. And when we are talking with our clients, we're trying to help them understand which of those are relevant to the products and services that they're trying to sell to their core segments and consumers. If we go to the next slide, this is a really important topic that we're talking to our clients about, because if we mine through the data that we have and look at the types of challenges and issues that our consumer companies are facing around the world, one of the biggest, I guess, themes coming out of the last year is that our homes have now become our hubs for almost everything. So whether it's shopping from home, whether it's cooking differently, whether it's ordering food, whether it's just remodeling my home, whether it's telemedicine from home, whether it's how I exercise and stay fit from home, we have seen over time a very big increase in terms of what people are comfortable, happy, and feel good about doing in their home. And it has just become the place where consumers are working, playing, learning, and taking care of themselves. And I think it's something to really pay attention to, because while we talk about the desire for all of us to be out of our homes, to be back in restaurants, to be back in movie theaters and concerts, that may be the case, and I'm sure many of us will partake in those things. But at the same time, our homes are now our hubs. And that means different things depending on what you're trying to sell to me as a consumer, because I am much more often to be doing something at home in terms of the different facets of my life. Next slide, please. We talked about just the differences in the way we're purchasing. So we went into lockdowns. People, as probably all of us did, stocked up on cleaning products and toilet paper and all sorts of things that went out of stock. But what has happened over time is that consumers, whether it's because they've tried new products, they've tried new brands, they've tried store brands, or they've tried private label, they've brought different sorts of things into their home. And they've really thought about what is it that I actually need. So there's been a much more conscious thinking about our shopping, what we bring in. We've been kind of shut out of buying certain things, whether that might be apparel, because we haven't needed new clothing necessarily. But I think what we're seeing here is the trend towards price sensitivity and really taking a look at what else is out there that gives me more value for money is a trend that's here to stay. And I think that what we're seeing in some of the discussions we're having with our clients is that there is going to be a kind of an increased competition for the indulgent dollar. So if you want to trade me up, or if you want me to buy something that's premium, you're going to have to really tell me why I need that, because many consumers around the world have been living over the last year with what they could get their hands on, with something that's in their past purchased uh, online bucket, and we've really come to accept what the way in which we brought things into our home and what we were willing to spend on doing so. And some of the conversations that we've been having as we see some of this data in different parts of the world is, has consumption reached its zenith? We talk about maybe going back into something that looks like the Roaring 20s in terms of spending when we come out of this pandemic, but there is a lot of conversation that maybe that's not the case. Maybe consumers have figured out that there are certain essentials they need, and there's certain things that they will spend their money on for indulgences. But our clients and probably those listening really need to think about, what does that mean for you? Which end of the spectrum are you? Where are your products and services in this space? Because it's not going to be easy to get the consumer dollars out of our wallets for just any old thing. We've had a lot of time to reflect on what we really need, and I think Eliza touched on that as well in terms of just sustainability and what we're consuming, and do we need all the things that we've been buying before? If we can go to the next slide. So clearly, and I'm sure that all of you have experienced this, there's been a massive shift to digital buying, online purchasing. That was already a trend that was there, and more or less so in different parts of the world. But certainly, purchasing online is here to stay. We're not going to go back into stores the way we were, and that's very true for certain categories. If we look at grocery shopping data for food and other items, it's exploded across all generations, all age groups, and no more so than here in the United States, where probably we were laggards in terms of adopting online grocery shopping, but that is certainly here to stay. And that presents a number of issues and challenges for manufacturers and branded goods that are used to be, kind of shopped for in store. Now, quite often we are setting that up with a artificial intelligence bot. We're using past purchase lists from what we've purchased previously. We're not necessarily adding to those lists when we go to do our online shopping. And so there's going to be a real challenge for manufactured goods to get into that basket, to actually help me understand what's new and improved, to sell me up to a larger SKU. When we're all using our AI bots and letting those bots be an interface between what we might want and what we actually end up buying online. And I think Eliza mentioned this as well. The challenge for many retailers and those trying to sell to us online is that the experience is not necessarily where it needs to be. So yes, the younger generations have high expectations in terms of how they want to be served online and how easy and convenient it should be. But across the board, we've seen in the 20 markets we've looked at and at the different consumer groups we've looked at, almost everybody expects that the experience of shopping online needs to be improved. And consumers will gravitate to where they are having a better experience, whether that be availability, whether that is free delivery, whether that is how returns work, and so on. So I think retailers and by association, any brand.com manufacturers need to really be thinking about the experience they're offering shoppers, because so many of us have been jettisoned into the online shopping world and haven't necessarily been satisfied with what we found there. That is an issue we're absolutely working with our clients at EY. If we can go to the next slide. We mentioned Eliza mentioned data and data privacy and how that's changing through the generations. We don't necessarily have a generational cut on this, but what we have seen is that consumers, because of the understanding that their data, first of all, might be able to help solve some of the issues related to the pandemic, are more willing to share that in a blinded way. They're also more willing to share it for other societal challenges, whether it's traffic flow, educational outcomes. And so that's something that we're keeping an eye on to really understand, how is it that consumers are feeling different about sharing their data into a larger pool to solve big issues. But I think Eliza also made the point, which we've seen too, consumers are willing to share their data for a better experience, for a more customized experience, particularly around healthy living, better food options, food choices. They're looking for recommendations, but recommendations that are personalized for them. And so that's something to watch, because there's certainly different trends around different parts of the world in how consumers feel about that. But we believe this is a growing opportunity to really understand what consumers are willing to share and why. If we go to the next slide. So we don't have a tremendous amount of generational data in the work that we've done, but we have a few cuts where we've asked different questions. And you can see here, it's probably not surprising. Millennials and Gen Z, have been hit in terms of their finances. I think, many of them have possibly lost their incomes or lost their jobs, have not had the amount of financial security to get through the pandemic. So they're certainly more concerned about what they've been through and where they are. But they're also more optimistic that change is ahead, that they'll survive. They're younger, of course, and they're expecting that the economy will recover and they'll be back on their feet. Interestingly, we've also seen that these generations, having experienced what they've gone through in the last year, that aspect of paying attention to what they consume, paying attention to sustainability, paying attention to the purpose of the organizations they buy from, is something that is also coming through stronger than any of the generational research that we had in the past prior to the pandemic. And so I think organizations really need to be thinking about, how do you play into that? If these younger generations need to understand the value I bring from a purpose point of view, what does that mean for me? Next slide, please. I threw this in here because I think it's important just to understand. I think there's always good intentions, and I would say this is across all generations in our research, all age groups. Many say they're wanting to pay more for sustainable products, pay more for things that help the environment. They say it's a top priority for them. But I think the watch out for organizations is to really do the research and the homework to understand what that truly means. What do you actually need to deliver to the consumers you care about? Because what people say and what they do is not always the same thing. And so we've, in some of the research, we've asked other types of questions to get at true behavior. And you can see there with some of the data, while people are interested in environmental impact, they not necessarily want to pay for it. And so I think that's a big conversation with governments, organizations, and consumers about, who bears the cost of kind of reversing some of the damage we've been doing. We also note that, many people say they will continue to spend more on delivery services and other things where you get more packaging and that sort of thing. So I think this is really something to keep an eye on and get the best data you can to understand what it means for the consumers you're trying to reach in terms of their sustainability ambitions and what they're willing to do. Next slide, please. So as we've been going through the last several months and collecting up this data and really trying to think about, what does some of it mean? And I've taken you through kind of a whirlwind of, the immense amount of content and data and research we have. But one of the things that we're signaling to our clients is redesign and think about how people live. So we've all begun to live differently. So it used to be a very linear process, especially around buying things, where we made a list, went out to the shops, bought something, came home. That's been in the process of being upended for some time, but that has really been cemented now. People want to be accessed where they are, doing what they do, how they're living, whether that's at home or they're somewhere else, and you have to meet them there. And so it's really important to think about, where are the consumers that you're after, what are they doing, and how do they want to be accessed? I think number two, which fits into this, consumers find out about products and services everywhere. So, platforms like TikTok, et cetera, were mentioned before. People find out about different products and services all sorts of ways. And they expect to be able to buy those products and services right then and there when they learn about them. And so there's a lot of work to be done just to understand where the consumers are, how they're buying, how they get information, and ensuring that your systems are set up really to go after those consumers in the moment. That then lends itself into number three in terms of really thinking about, well, can I supply goods and services that way? We're seeing that there's a lot of demand that's different, and that's putting a lot of stress on our client supply chains, particularly around foods. There's a data point here. As people have gone through the last year, they're really talking about and wanting more locally sourced goods. That includes food. It also includes inputs into all sorts of products that they buy. Again, that's going to upend a lot of supply chains that are global in nature and don't necessarily lend themselves to this sort of demand. Number four, asset right. So this is a trend we were seeing before the pandemic, but it's certainly increased around subscription services, things that people will buy automatically, things that can be created through an ecosystem that our clients don't necessarily need to provide everything, but they need to bring all the piece parts together. And we're seeing a lot more of that now and working through thinking about, quote, the asset light strategy, but also the asset right. What do you as an organization really need to be doing, and where can you just partner up and do other things differently? And then finally, looking at value through a wider lens. I mentioned it, I think Eliza mentioned it too. Younger people especially, they want to understand who you are as an organization, who you are as a company, what you bring to them specifically. Do you live their values? And do understand their values. And that's something that's quite important as we start to think about, future strategic planning over the next couple of years. As these generations have more wealth and money to spend, they're going to put their spending where they feel that the company understands them and lives their values. And that brings me to my last slide, which is just trust. So one of the things that we've learned over the last, several months through the pandemic is that, the trust in institutions, governments, media, if it was rusty before, it's certainly been shaken through the pandemic. And it's something we're learning is very important to younger generations, but also very fragile. So we're saying 47% of our consumers that we looked at really are willing to jump ship from a brand or organization if they lose trust in what you're doing and you've damaged the respect that they've had for you as a company, a brand, or an organization. So bear that in mind as you think about how you communicate and what you communicate and walking the talk for the younger folks out there. I think that's it for me.
Thank you so much, Christina, for that insightful presentation. We'll take 5 minutes break, and I propose that we all come back at 2:57. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to our webinar on new consumer trends. I think we can also have our panelists put their cameras on. So now that we've heard a little bit about who are these new generation of consumers, we've also heard from Christina about what consumers in general are looking for. Let's see how those could then tie into business decisions and investment strategies. So today on our panel, alongside Christine and Eliza, let me introduce three distinguished business representatives. We have firstly Neven Brankovic. Neven is the board member and vice president of corporate activities at Atlante Grupa. Atlante Grupa is one of the leading FMCG groups in the CE region. Thanks, Eliza. One of the leading groups in the FMCG region with well-known brands in coffee, snacks, and confectionery products. Welcome, Neven. We also have Dr. Jem Karakas. Jem is an investor in industry disrupting sectors, a senior advisor and board member, as well as previously he was CEO in Pladis Group, one of the global confectionery groups with brands that many of us know, including Ulker in Turkey, Godiva, and others. So welcome to Jem. And last but not least, we have Andrius Mikalauskas. Andrius is CEO of Barbora Poland. Barbora is the online business of a very large food retailer in the Baltics and also an EBRD client. So welcome to everyone for the panel. And we'll start off with a question for our three business representatives, Neven, Jem, and Andrius. What can you tell us now that we've heard a little bit about the new consumer patterns? What are you actually seeing in your business? So perhaps we start with Neven.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you for inviting me to this panel. We have been cooperating with the EBRD for such a number of years, and I'm glad that we are sharing the thoughts on this topic together. Well, when it comes to the consumption patterns of new generations, there are many that have been around for a while, but COVID has really tremendously accelerated them and put them in the focus of consumers and consequently us producers. Eliza and Christina have mentioned this several times, and it is our experience as well, that all consumers, but in particular younger generation, will take social and environmental issues more seriously, rewarding businesses for using profits for socially advanced agendas. I have to say that, and we all know that the issue of sustainability has been around for almost a decade. But now it has really become a mandatory element of our behavior, not only because we as a listed company have to report on sustainability due to our regulatory obligations, but our brands will really not be relevant anymore if they are not perceived by our consumers as eco-friendly and sustainable choices. We all know that Gen Z look at the ingredients labels a lot. They try to buy fresh, organic, natural foods, and thus we as a company are investing a great deal of money in what the EU Parliament has defined as a green and sustainable economy. In this respect, our research has really found that during COVID, our Gen Z consumers really express, I would say, greater appetite for making more sustainable choices. But as Christina mentioned it, it is to be noted that many of our consumers will indicate their preference for a sustainable product, but ultimately they'll buy either cheaper or more accessible alternative. In pre-COVID time, we were measuring this, and we experienced that about 30% of our consumers would indicate their intention to consume a sustainable product. But when it comes to the purchasers, these products often would amount for less than 5%. We feel that this is certainly changing, but it's taking slowly. What consumer behavior will also stick after the COVID? I would say it very much depends on the geography and sector. But other than sustainability, our experience is that other patterns that we expect to remain after COVID time are increased focus on health or healthy products, certainly online grocery shopping, and home nesting. Home nesting will certainly remain as a pattern because people have now really used to work from home. Let me just tell you that the whole year, 1/3 of our employees, and we're talking about, we have almost close to 6,000 employees, almost 2,000 of them are working for a year now out of home, and certainly some of it will remain as a pattern.
Thank you, Nevin. Andrews, do you want to maybe comment as well?
Yes, thanks, Tamara. So first of all, about online groceries, where I'm coming from. So it used to be a trend, emerging trend, but I can say that after last year, it's not a trend, but it's a retail already. It's an integral part already of our economy. And about millennials and Generation Z. So what COVID did, I would say that COVID is removing the boundary between the generations. All of them are shopping online now. Until this crisis, we had mostly millennials who were our customers. They're, how to say, a bread and butter for us. We have kids now, they're professionals at this time, and they are the majority of our sales. But now we have Generation Z coming into play. They have great potential, they are very advanced in technology, and they set very high standards. How it's changing us, how it's changing online business of Maxima Group. It's higher frequency, so people are buying more often, and we're not doing weekly shoppings or 2-week shoppings. They are less patient, they require same day, and I would even say that same day is not enough. Delivery now is a requirement. Focus on quality, and focus on quality in terms of service. Our visiting card is our courier, he's the only contact, and he is the one which is important. If a courier makes bad service, or we make a bad service as a company, there is no loyalty in Generation Z, as I see. Someone else can provide a good service. So really, it's putting us to make our best effort every day. And of course, mobile only generation. So mobile application is a must. It's impossible to work without mobile application. And I think it's already 2 years since mobile took over desktop users in Barbora. And sustainability, of course, is really a hot topic for us. It is mostly packaging. Yeah, so these are the trends in short.
Thank you. Yes, you guys have seen a lot of growth in the last 12 months, so exciting times. Jem, over to you.
Thank you, Tamara. So there are quite specific consumption and shopping behavior of younger millennials and Gen Z that we're witnessing across the globe, and almost on a uniform basis. I mean, Eliza mentioned that, you know, Gen Zs and Gen Xs and the baby boomers, the definition of those have been different from region to region or country to country. But for millennials and Gen Z, I think we see a almost uniform pattern across the entire globe. So what are those? One, consumption is not necessarily related to ownership, but access, hence the sharing economy. Two, consumption as an expression of individual's identity, hence the requirement or request for customized solutions or choice variety, fueling new entrants into industry verticals. Three, authenticity and ethical standing of brands and companies and their importance, hence the rise of smaller and very opinionated players, the players that stand for something. All these patterns have created a very challenging environment for the incumbent players in FMCG industry. I mean, FMCG has been quite protected space for incumbent players. That is why we had witnessed very little change in industry league tables until, I guess, 2010s. And the companies are always the same, except the mergers among themselves. You would all recall some still very prevalent barriers to entry into the industry, into FMCG industry, such as large manufacturing capex requirements, no longer relevant, concentrated channel structures, making smaller players difficult to access the shelves, no longer that relevant, television being the primary medium of brand development, and indeed a very expensive one, no longer relevant, right? All these made these larger players and the industry in general to be not too responsive to consumer needs and perhaps needing that way. I think one metric is quite stellar. The median innovation cycle from ideation to launch in snacking, global snacking industry was 18 to 24 months. By then, the consumer needs had already moved on. But because all the players in industry were running at the same clock speed, it didn't matter much. So I think the way younger millennials and now Gen Zs interact with outside world and the way that they shop has dislocated the entire FMCG industry. For once, starting up a brand is much less capital intensive, and building the brand requires a completely different omni-channel and omnipresent approach. Reaching customers is also arguably much easier through digital channels, and converting shoppers require, again, a whole new set of capabilities. And large organization structures with many functional verticals and multiple layers by design cannot respond to this omnipresent millennial or Gen Z consumer that is active literally 24 hours a day. So younger millennials and Gen Z are also great in processing large and complex data sets and hence able to detect what is authentic and what is not. And they are quite skeptical about larger corporates. These all present an advantage for nimble and up-and-coming players, but there is a downside, right? As Andreas mentioned, brand and product loyalty in younger millennials and Gen Z is very elusive, and brand inertia is not at all strong, so there's no brand loyalty. So what we now have to do is we have to win every purchase, every single instance, over and over and again. I mean, you cannot have just like a neighborhood supermarket that, you know, in the caption area, everybody goes there. They switch from one product to the next, one shopping environment to the next. And we have to really engage with consumers who have a new set of demands, and they prefer brands that show personality and uniqueness, but are also not very well known and recognized. So relevance and speed are important. I'm going to give you one example. I'm involved with a small Irish vegan / gluten-free player. And we decided to go into Canadian market in 2019. So shipping bread all the way from Ireland to Canada. So we picked a single traditional channel, a single account, but then augmented that channel with our own online retail store and an omni-channel presence with around-the-clock online engagement with our consumer community. So in a matter of a year, we become the third largest player in our target market. So 10 years ago, an Irish bakery startup entering into Canada and succeeding would have been unimaginable. But with the younger millennials and Gen Z coming into play, it is now doable.
Thank you so much, Jem. Definitely something we all need to watch out for. Maybe circling back to Christina this time. Christina, can you tell us a little bit more about what are some of the things you are working on with your clients? You mentioned a few things. Maybe you could elaborate a bit. Thank you.
Sure.
Oh, and apologies, before Christina starts, I've been prompted, just to remind everyone, you can start posting your Q&A on the sidebar and we'll get to it at the end of the panel. Back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Tamara. I mean, I think Jem, I think, did a fantastic job of outlining a number of the challenges and the issues that some of the clients that we work with, which are large global FMCG companies, in terms of trying to, run parallel systems in some sense, where there are legacy assets, there are legacy ways of working in the organization, there are legacy ways of reaching consumers, and all of those are still relevant for a significant part of the population. And certainly, there's kind of a divergence here, because for maybe older folks, older people, those legacy systems may work. Some of the shopping may have gone online, but as I was mentioning before, a lot of what we're seeing is certainly for, consumers maybe older than millennials, or we're catching some of them, that movement to online shopping, especially in the grocery space, has almost become, quickly on autopilot. And so for people who are just using their AI bots, they're voice controlling their shopping lists, they're looking at past purchase lists, the idea of adding new brands or new things, or finding, new products and services may become, something that is irrelevant to them, especially for categories of products that they care less to investigate, right? These are things we just fill our pantries with, we fill our homes with, and we're not interested to spend much time investigating. And so there's kind of a dichotomy here about what we actually want to shop for in terms of passion and investigating and looking for new things, and what we just buy. The buying is moving to autopilot. Now, that may look different for, as Jem was saying, younger generations. They're actually not necessarily just shopping, that way. They're finding things in apps, like Eliza was mentioning. They learn about things in Instagram, in TikTok. My daughter, who's a Gen Z, told me all of her ideas come from TikTok, which I found frightening. But the challenge then for these large organizations, which we're working through with them, is how do you maintain that legacy system? Can you migrate some of that for the consumers who are still over there? And then how do you set up a new way of going to market in the way that Jem described for an up and coming generation who's not quite there in terms of the wallet, if we're talking about Gen Z, Gen Z, in terms of spending power. Not to mention, I think he's absolutely right, not very loyal, because they're always on the lookout for something new, and they indeed find new things in the social media that they're in. So I think that one of the biggest challenges for some of our clients is to just understand these two diverging paths and how to look forward while understanding what part of their legacy operations needs to be maintained to ensure that they're still relevant to, you know, the people like me, or, you know, most of us on on the videos on this call.
Can I just contribute to that? Because I think Christina's made some really sort of important points there. Is that I think there's a real demarcation, in my view, of how millennials have experienced the last 12 months and how Gen Z feel they've had a year of their youth robbed from them. And so I think that whole kind of concept of the roaring 20s, that everyone kind of, once everyone's vaccinated, goes out there and rediscovers restaurants and festivals and theatres and cinemas and collective experiences. I think that's going to be very true of Gen Z. Now, millennials have had this kind of moment where we've all been thrown back into our homes just at a time when their parents moving into their middle age. So I think one of the things that is going to happen to millennials is they've had this year of domestication where they've, you know, having more time to prepare breakfast, more time to have dinner with their kids, more time potentially to spend actually looking for different brands that they're willing to invest in. And I think for millennials, also important is this new era of hybrid working. And I think that's going to be most favourable to them. So they're going to be spending more time at home, more time working at home, more time at home with their kids. And therefore, actually, I think they'll start to move into bigger dwellings with a garden. And so that period of their 40s and 50s will, I think, move away from those experience-based purchases, which they already have, which was sort of surmised and typified in their love of avocado on toast and coffee, into actually just, you know, as we said, that much more kind of the home hub and what you do in that home. Do you buy a coffee machine, and do you kind of buy special milk and have that delivered from a local farm and really luxuriate in that kind of occasion of home coffee? Or, you know, other ways in which you can spend your money, but also locate it in the home. So that's millennials. I think for Gen Z, I think that, yes, we talked about them as a brand. And I think the really important thing you need to be thinking about is they are the brand, not you. So when you're trying to buy their loyalty, don't think B2C, think B2B. And I think that's absolutely crucial. The second thing I'd say about Gen Z is, yes, they're digital natives, but what they love is face-to-face communication. And I've seen this at the university where I work. These are kids that are paying £9,000, British pounds a year for a tuition and their education. What do they see as premium service is not online lectures and online libraries. It's face-to-face. Can they knock on my door and have a conversation with a real human being? And the thing about, you know, delivery of groceries, pizza, whatever it is, the point that I think companies are not getting is that end point. Your delivery drivers, you know, and we know the last 12 months, the most exciting thing that's happened in our lives every day is the knock on the door from the delivery man. And actually what you're not doing is making that end experience a moment, that end experience humane, because in most circumstances, these delivery drivers are pretty well poor paid, have no investment or passion, and are not conveying that passion in the product and brand that you're giving to the customers. And I think if you create that humanity, as well as that digital first experience, then I think you're going to be generating some brand loyalty with Gen Z. And I would, final point about sustainability, I think there's a lot of hypocrisy, and I think Christina really brought this to attention, is that it's great intentions, but really when it comes to action is very different set of priorities. And I think, you know, what Gen Z are looking for is education, actually. They're looking to be educated on, you know, how food is being transported, how food is being made, how, you know, packaging is being developed, you know, and I think that help them make good decisions by educating them and also being honest with them, because I think a lot of companies in the last 12 months have really fallen short in trying to sound good and act moral, but actually the hypocrisy, whether it be, you know, getting Uyghurs to make your clothes, or you know, the kind of number of women you have on your board falling short of those moral and ethical obligations. So I think be wary of Gen Z, because yes, they're morally driven, but they also have the savviness to reveal your hypocrisies.
Thank you so much, Eliza. Coming back to how to do them, and also in like what Eliza said, Nevin, also talking about coffee. Maybe tell us, how are you marketing to your new consumers, younger generations?
Absolutely. Since Gen Z and millennials as consumer really devote a huge amount of time to various forms of digital platforms, obviously everyone is shifting to social media. We were investigating, and it is almost unimaginable that millennials and particular Gen Z during the COVID period, they have increased their time spent on social media 60% in comparison to pre-COVID time. So obviously Atlantic is reaching towards these consumers through different social platforms, and our investments in them have more than doubled in last 3 years. However, do not think that the TV advertising is losing its grip, at least in the region. Our total investment in ATL, above the line advertising, still 40% is in TV, is being invested in TV advertising, and some 40% in digital. And then the print and billboards are diminishing every day more and more. We have also invested in the influencers, but we are very careful as we want our brands to relate with our core values, and that is not always easy to match with what different influencers are representing. So when talking about digital, we have a huge number of our marketeers that are really trying to make digital content as relevant as possible to our consumers. And that's not always easy, because you need to really find the content that is unique for each brand, each USP. So we are investing quite a number of time.
You also said during one of our previous discussions how you were surprised that some of your quote more traditional products are also getting traction with Generation Z. Can you maybe tell us more about it?
Yeah, you're right. When talking about Gen Z, one would always think that the original products used by their grandparents, would immediately fall into a category of old-fashioned. Our experience with ground and roast coffee, also what we know as a Turkish coffee, as we use it here in the region, I would say is rather positive. We have managed not only to maintain the market share of Turkish coffee, but it has even slightly increased versus other types of coffees such as Nespresso or instant. And which might be interesting is that this is not only happening in Serbia, where coffee consumers are constantly increased, but Gen Z are showing same pattern in markets like Slovenia, where one would certainly not expect such trends. Obviously, we are investing a lot of our resources in marketing of our Turkish coffee and upkeeping of this local habit, which have gained momentum in time of COVID. Buying local, as Christina has mentioned several times, has become very important in COVID time, and our coffee obviously fits into this category, and we are happy that Gen Z and millennials are continuing to indulge themselves in the Turkish coffee, although it's so traditional in the way how we prepare it and in the way how this has been a product which was indulged by their grandparents as well.
So much for that. Circling back to Jem, this engagement with the younger generation, which is 24/7, sounds like something that companies need to invest a lot of time in. Can you maybe comment? How does that look from your perspective?
Yeah, it is a 24/7 engagement because the consumer typology that we're dealing with is an always on and is also global, whether or not you have your product offering globally. So even if you're a local or regional product offering, although we're doing all sorts of geo-targeting measures to prevent others to access to that product content, the consumer or the influencer base that you have is globally based. So it is difficult, but it's also quite cost effective. So let me illustrate the point. The last time I had a conventional global ad campaign produced under my watch was a few years ago, and this standard campaign cost several million euros, 6-7 million euros, just to produce only, and around 9 months, which is quite fast. So if you want to do a proper global advertising program, it takes 9 months, 12 months to produce it. So this is how we ran our marketing campaigns for decades, because you had one primary media, TV, and a captive audience that is looking at the screen with the family and the loved ones. So one ad for the entire consumer typologies, entire range of consumer typologies, and the entire range of need states. The same ad in the morning, the same ad in the afternoon, the same ad at night, the same ad to this consumer, to that consumer in multiple geographies. Now, we can and we have to micro-segment our consumers and interact with them quite differently. But for that, we shoot 20, 30 different short videos of, I don't know, 5-8 seconds, because they don't watch after 3 seconds anyway. So production is an ongoing process where you shoot dozens of content for a global brand, or for any brand to that matter, for a few £100,000 rather than costing millions. And if some of these content doesn't work out, and you can see it pretty rapidly as you test it in the social media, you drop those contents and you write it off. Now, this is what firms can do. However, consumers do not necessarily want this either. So they want to increasingly see organic content generated by an ecosystem. Hence, the video content focus of younger millennials and Gen Z. And somewhere I read that Gen Z was the loneliest generation. So they were actively looking at ways to engage and connect with like-minded individuals. So brands actually can facilitate this rather authentic connection and conversation. And to the extent that they can do it, they become relevant to these new consumers. But it goes beyond working with mega influencers. You have to seek real people who generate interesting content and people who embody your brand's values. So what I have been doing for the past year or two, is leveraging what I would call micro influencers, say with 20, 30, maximum 40,000 followers each, and you don't necessarily pay them anything. So trying to create an organic community out of your consumers is the key, because these consumers would like authenticity. Mega influencers are not seen as authentic, understandably, to these new consumers.
Thank you,
Thank you
Jem.
so much.
Sorry, Ellen. I think it's really interesting how what you're saying and what the research shows is also very much prevalent in the different conversations we have with any 20-year-old, really, about the authenticity point and the kind of immersion in the consumer experience. Maybe Christina, you could tell us a bit about how can companies use consumer data to try to better reach them, understand them, or market them. And maybe you can comment how are companies doing that today successfully or maybe not so successfully.
Yeah, I think that's a $24,000 question. You know, certainly consumers or consumer companies, FMCG companies are awash in more data than they've ever seen. And I think that is becoming a significant challenge in terms of understanding all the data that they have globally and trying to understand, you know, how those data sets communicate with one each other. Do they have a master data plan? Are they capable of turning all that data into strategic insights, either on a segment of people or in a one-to-one conversation with any of us? If you take a typical global FMCG company, they have multiple categories around the world. Are they able to see me as one consumer of all of their brands and categories versus what was traditional? They saw me at the end of a particular brand or SKU from their side. So I think this is probably one of the biggest challenges that these companies are facing now, is really to understand what they have in their hands and how to reimagine how they use all of this data, how they connect it together. We've talked about consumers increasingly wanting more personalized experiences, either with a brand or with a service, or the product to be customized or personalized in and of itself, which has other implications, of course, for you know, how you get the product to me if I want it to be bespoke for me. So you know, a lot of the work we're doing on this end is really helping to create the data strategy. What do you want to do with all this data, and then which data is relevant and which isn't, and how do you bring it all together to have one point of truth about the consumer that you want to target. And I think, you know, every day we're generating, you know, millions of data points that these companies are collecting. And they're trying to understand how to best use it and how to understand, you know, what are the limitations, which looks different, of course, in different parts of the world in terms of how they can use this data. A number of these companies that I work with are trying to understand how, you know, Facebook and Google and others get around certain governmental laws and regulations, or they appear to. So there's just a lot of challenge in this space, absolutely, in terms of just understanding, right, how best to use all of what you have your fingertips on. And I think the stewardship of it is migrating in organizations. So it may have been sort of at some point in the past sitting in the IT department, or, you know, some people who looked after databases, market researchers somehow. It's very much being elevated to a conversation with your chief strategy officer, your CMO, even the CEO, in terms of how to use data as a real strategic asset for the organization. I can't say I've got some great examples of who's getting it right.
Well, probably their confidentiality agreements.
Yeah, there's that too. But I think it's one of the biggest challenges, I think, right now for organizations, because there's of all of the trends that people are describing here. So understanding which data is valuable, which isn't, and sifting through, you know, what is available and understanding how to best use it.
Thank you. I mean, indeed, Andrews, actually, in one of our prep calls, you were mentioning that you or Barbora chose maybe not to collect certain data. Maybe you could give us a bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. So I would say that there are two types of data. And maybe to be, first of all, Barbora is data only. So we are data company. We don't have a shop. Our shop is our website. And basically we mimic all the process of shopping with our interface, with our processes, which is only data. And customers definitely are part of our data set. And we have two types of data. It's mandatory. We have the name, surname, and email address, and so on. And then there is optional data, which is sex, it's your age, it's your occupation, and so on and so on. So here we decided to say that no, we do not collect optional data, and we need to stay safe with this. I really treated customer data as an asset, and I treat it also as a liability. So I would say in e-commerce business, word data and consumer data would appear in all three corners of a SWOT analysis. It's strength, it's a weakness, it's opportunity, it's a threat. You know, we focus on strength of the data, but we decided not to do too much, not to collect too much. And today's discussion, or revealed Generation Z and millennials are really sensitive about the data. And is it kept private? Is it kept safely? So our decision was to not to collect too much of the data. Of course, we have a lot of data. Everything is a click. Every step of a customer is a click, and it's recorded. So it's a great data set, but we have to be careful with it.
Can I just respond to that? Because I think it's when you're talking about Gen Z, as I said earlier on in my speech, this is a generation that are so well versed and so sophisticated in their understanding of technology and particularly sharing data. You know, it's a trend amongst Gen Z to have not just one Instagram account, but multiple Instagram accounts, all with different sort of aspects of their brand and their personality on show in that on those particular profiles. It's a trend amongst Gen Z to clean their Instagram page of all posts every month. Just again, it's just that sort of very aware, this level of consciousness of what they're putting out there. And likewise, it's very common amongst Gen Z to have multiple email addresses in which they subscribe to things and give to certain companies as a way of just basically bracketing and disconnecting themselves from certain websites they are engaging with. So I think Gen Z are very aware of their data. I think they're very skeptical of tech platforms. I think the tech industry and their culpability and their environmental impact is coming into question by Gen Z. So I think there's a real kind of reckoning that is happening. And I think the most interesting development when it comes to Gen Z is TikTok, and in many ways it's the antidote to Instagram, because it's not the same, it doesn't have the same level of hate and kind of cybercrime culture that Instagram has. It doesn't have the influencer perfectibility and perfect life and airbrushing that Instagram has. It doesn't have the kind of followers and influencers culture that's already been referenced. I mean, I know there's a trend, it has been a trend towards targeting micro influencers, but I think even that, it's important to remember that every Gen Z member thinks they're an influencer. So I think you really need to play to that evolving, and it is evolving very, very quickly, relationship with technology and the expectation. And just final point is that I think one of the things that, say, a store like Apple and Sephora makeup brand has done really well for Gen Z is attracting them in store and recognizing that this is a generation that wants experience, real life experience, as much as digital first experience. And that clicks and bricks dimension hasn't really been referenced, but I think it's really important still for teenage girls, like it was when I was a young girl and like it was when my mother was a young girl. The shopping mall is still the social hub. It still has that communal kind of attractability, and shopping being part of that communal experience, but also learning experience. Learn how to put on your makeup, learn how to cook, learn about different foods, and having that dual experience of real life bricks and digital first clicks, I think is really important to Gen Z. And I don't think from what I can see, a lot of brands, I've worked with a couple dealing with this, that are doing that and getting that right.
Maybe I would just add on what Eliza just said, is that I would say what's very important is to strive to create this effortless and seamless shopping. Therefore, we do personalization, we do client segmenting, and we do this personal and the unique individual shopping experience for our clients. But we do not do it based on sensitive data, like sex, like age, like this. We do this from our insights. We have 13,000 clients buying every day, and this is a data set with which we can really decide what is working best, and what saves time for consumer to shop as fast as possible. Yeah, that's it.
Thank
I
you
would
so
say
much.
I would say it's very difficult to become a personalized experience which all of our consumers are looking, unless you have sufficient data on such a consumer. So for us, this was quite an issue when the GDPR regulation was introduced a few years ago. And it's a constant fight between the marketing department and our compliance department, how to deal with the collection of such personal data. On the level of the company, we have, for that matter, we have forbidden different marketing departments for different brands to exchange information between them about the particular consumers, in order to avoid potential infringement of the GDPR rules. So our marketing departments need the information, but then there's a huge concern that data protection and this concern of particular of Gen Z generation for the protection of their privacy. So well, it's something to be really concerned with.
Thank you so much, everyone. Given that we are receiving quite a few questions from our audience, maybe we just go to kind of how do you see a Gen Zer, let's say in 5 to 10 years from now? Maybe if everyone could just give us a kind of few words or description of how do they see. Nevin, maybe we start with you.
Sure. I think everybody's very much aware, and I think Eliza has summarized it pretty well at the beginning, how Gen Z is totally different than any of the other generations, in the sense that they have not been exposed to some of the things that we consider as so normal. You know, they don't remember, you know, when you say that they don't remember time before internet, you know, one would say, wow, you know, how the only way how they are, you know, how they are collecting data is actually based on social media. This is the way how they, you know, how they collect any information about a world. So for that matter, I believe that their growing up will be much different than Generation X or baby boomers. But one thing that I'm very happy looking at my kids, is that they are extremely well aware of the world around them. They are very educated, and that is bringing me, I would say, a hope that they will be better citizens than we were at the time when we were growing up.
Thank you so much. Jem, what is your kind of view on the future of Gen Z generation?
Yeah, I mean, we have all witnessed the attitudes of millennials starting to temper as they reach, new milestones in their lives. I think the same will happen to Gen Z, but nevertheless, the changes that their consumption and shopping behavior brought to our industry will be very lasting, and I think we will probably see dramatic changes in the food industry league tables in this decade, because not only this is something that is relevant to this very large Gen Z and millennial population, but also particularly over this past 1 year during COVID, these younger millennials and Gen Z have been influencing their extended families, parents and grandparents, with their value sets, which their digital savviness, their value sets, and also their shopping patterns as well.
So much. Eliza, you're on mute.
I still see them living at home, reliant financially.
Oh no.
Can you hear me? Yeah. I still see them living at home, financially reliant on mum and dad for a lot longer. I see them as entrepreneurs, having not just one job, but multiple streams of revenue. I see them still very political and activist. I don't think they're going to be tempered and neutralized like millennials have been. I think they're still going to be quite an activist political generation. They just might become a bit more skeptical and cynical in old age. And finally, I think that they are going to be living longer and therefore having multi-stage careers, and that's going to really determine their spending and how they spend it. So they're not going to have one job or even one career. It's been estimated they have 5 careers in their lifetime. So that desire to have quite a fluid career and indeed quite potentially have babies later, have families later, and buy houses later will, as I say, go back to that extended adolescence, and that means financially dependent on mum and dad, and that means buying groceries as a family rather than as an individual household.
Much for that. Andreas, what would be your picture of a grown-up Gen Zer?
I would see a few things. First of all, it is effortless life, really striving for easy things and not taking so much pride in doing something yourself. It's really just the trend, I would say, with using all the apps, all the deliveries, all the services just delivered to you. This is I see as a normal in 10 years. Changing jobs, definitely. Moving across industries as everything is digital. Digital only. I think digital is not optional. It will be digital only. I don't know what is next. And from Barbara point of view, it will be higher frequency. So higher frequency shopper.
Good for business, definitely. Finally, Christina.
Yeah, this interesting question, and certainly I've been inspired by the comments shared here today by the panelists. I guess there's a couple of things, and I wonder if just hypothesizing how to bring it together. So I think we all agreed that Gen Z now is quite promiscuous in terms of brands and services and things that they're coming in and out of. They're finding new things all the time. But on the other hand, I think we also, and Eliza touched on this a little bit, they're also quite often insecure. They're high achievers, but social media tells them they're not enough. So there's going to be, I'm guessing, as they grow up and get older, some issues and challenges there about in terms of how they see themselves in the world and how they're comforted. I think Jem mentioned they're loneliest generation, and that may also be because they're tethered to their phones all the time. And so I just wonder if, as they mature and have to deal with some of these challenges that social media has put upon them in terms of how they view themselves and who they are, despite them, being mistrustful of large brands, or could brands step in and fill some of that void? Could they provide comfort? Could they provide some level of trust and fill that gap? Now, they would have to be, those brands would have to understand the values and what it is that those Gen Z segments want. In terms of their whether they're activists and what is it that's important to them, and be able to provide the data, to prove that whatever they're saying about their products, brands, and services lines up. But I just wonder. I feel like as this generation grows up, there's going to be somewhat of a void there in terms of just as they get through their post-secondary education and so on. I think there's a segment out there, and Eliza would probably know better, of people who are just constantly achieving for more, but told they're not doing enough. And I think that companies and institutions and organizations have an opportunity to maybe fill that gap or do something in that space if it lines up to what those Gen Z kidults are looking for.
Could I just add to that? I have written an article about why is it so tough being young, and I think there is it's become really difficult to be young, whether it's educational pressures, tech, social media pressures, familial pressures, or financial constraining of opportunities. I've written quite widely about that issue, and I think it's a really important one that Christina was highlighted.
Eliza, with two Gen Zs in the house, it definitely does not look like a carefree childhood to me.
No, they're not smoking in the same way. They're not having as much sex. They're not taking drugs. They're not drinking. Heck, some of them aren't even eating meat. It's this very puritanical way of being young, which is in stark contrast to the generations before them, when the notion of adolescence was carefree, the time you made mistakes, the time you found your path. And I think what's interesting is the way that people are aging these days is fundamentally being overhauled.
Eliza, do you think that the Gen Z have difficult or more difficult childhood than the millennials?
I think it's different. I think that millennials grew up at a time of political stability and economic prosperity, and so I think there was that kind of therefore aspiration and expectation, particularly with the mass expansion of university education, that that the path would be clear. Whereas I think Gen Z are a much more cynical generation, and they've had a much tougher kind of backdrop to growing up, which was the financial crisis, populism, and now COVID, which has been, and particularly COVID, I think actually given them a greater sense of realism, whilst also, as Christina alluded to, that constant comparative culture, which is incredibly damaging. That feeling of you never have done enough. There's always someone doing something more exciting, something better, achieving more, I think is one of the reasons, not all of the reasons, why 1 in 4 teenagers claim to have a mental health issue. And I would add to that, not just social media, education culture in which people either sink or swim is just so damaging to these kids, where they're constantly tested, they're constantly compared with each other, and not just in their class, not just in their school, not just nationally, but globally. Now we have a global graduate middle class that are competing against each other, and a global blue collar class that are also competing against each other, and that is exhausting, let me tell you.
Definitely sounds like it. We're just going to move to the Q&A, just conscious of time and also because we have a few good questions. So just looking here, we have a question from a baby boomer. So Eliza, I think you're the generational expert, but let me first say the question and then if anyone else wants to chime in, but probably this one's for you. It says, I'm a baby boomer. I've been working with retailers since the 90s on, healthy products and, making sure that buyers, that we're making products available with healthy choices, with quality, but that are not so expensive. So could you flesh out a bit more what you were saying about sustainability? Do consumers want sustainable goods without paying a premium? Or is it really up to the retailers and manufacturers to kind of push an agenda? I think you're on mute, Eliza, sorry.
I think I'll allow other people to comment on this. I think it's a key issue as to who takes the flak for basically making more sustainable products. But I would say that people want to buy things that make them feel good when buying them, and so that buying, that point of purchase has to feel clean, has to feel like they are doing good, has to feel like it's contributing to a broader agenda towards sustainability, and that has to be authentic, it has to be true, and that has to go from everything as to how the food is sourced right through to the cost of the packaging and how the packaging is made. And I think, yes, in essence, the buyer has a real desire to do that, but ultimately I think particularly Gen Z are going to be, as they already are, price conscious, and so that some of the flak has to be taken by the manufacturers and the retailers in terms of costs.
I would say that it's all of the producers are really wanting to produce as less expensive as possible, but obviously if you are using more expensive ingredients, which eco-friendly and sustainable raw materials are, then it will be great to produce them at a lower cost. But I think at this point of time, this is not so easy. We produce some 4,000 different SKUs in our factories, and I can assure you that the ones that are coming with let's say eco-friendly raw materials are simply more expensive, and some of the cost can be borne by the producer, but at the end of the day, we need to make margin in order to be a good company. Very simple.
Thank you, Neven and Eliza. We have one more question, which is, in my view, best suited for Gem. What would you advise to focus on, for a company to focus on when entering new markets, taking into account both COVID-19 as well as influence of millennials and Gen X, Z generation?
Well, I think it's all about focus, particularly entering into larger markets. Unless you focus, I mean, this is like, I think, a very stereotypical comment that I'm going to make. Unless you focus on a particular consumption occasion, need state, particular consumer typology, and a way to serve that consumer typology, you just simply cannot survive. So you need to fire all your bullets to a very narrow target. And when you're attacking to that consumer typology, you need to serve that through, as I said, in an omnipresent way. So you cannot just say, I'm going to sell this online or offline. I'm going to activate online or offline. You have to be able to do it 24/7 and catering to all, let's say, need states and times of the day of that particular consumer. I think that is the only way to relentless focus, laser sharp focus is the only way that new market entries could succeed in this very complex environment that we're operating in.
Thank you, Jem. So even though we had a couple of more questions, hopefully our viewers won't be too upset that we tried to wrap it up, given we're reaching our time today. So I think today we heard from people who are at the forefront of new consumer trends. We saw from be it Eliza's perspective as a researcher, business advisory, and also, real businesses. We heard that the values of these new generations are very different from the ones before. We saw that they want authenticity, social responsibility, sustainability in the products they buy. We also saw that the way in which they want to be marketed to is very different, and it demands a lot of engagement from the businesses selling those products, as well as perhaps a different kind of decision making or more nimble organizational functions. Also, one theme that maybe seems to have come out is that maybe we're not all that different, because as was said, millennials pulled the older generations to their consumption patterns, social media, sustainability, and then now Gen Z are also introducing even more things, social activism, as well as this desire really to engage with the products that they're consuming and be able to build trust without a need for loyalty or automatic loyalty. So again, thanks to technology and all the ways we're spending time with each other lately, it seems that this will continue. And businesses will need to adapt, certainly, but also foresee a number of these trends. In any case, we think that this is really an exciting time for the food and beverage space. We are so excited at EBRD Agribusiness to be a part of it. So again, thank you to all our viewers today. Thank you so much to the participants and panelists today. We hope everyone enjoyed it. Last but not least, let us just say that we have an agribusiness EBRD online, LinkedIn group. So please feel free to join that and see what upcoming webinars and topics we will be sharing there. Thank you so much.